The mess hall at Redstone Naval Command was chaos in steel and steam until she walked in. Lieutenant Avery Cross, 27, 5'8". Standard Navy blues. Nothing to set her apart from the 250 sailors starting their day. To most eyes, she was just another face in formation. But the next 18 seconds of her life would explode across the military world, shattering careers and rewriting what people thought they knew about women in combat. Quick check before we roll. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, so we know how far this unit reaches. And if this story grips you, hit subscribe so you never miss the next mission. Boots tapped softly against the polished floor as she crossed the threshold. The smell of powdered eggs and scorched coffee hung heavy. Voices overlapped, young recruits trading jokes, visiting Special Forces guests speaking in clipped tones, the clatter of trays echoing under steel rafters. Cross threaded through it all with a silence that felt practiced. Years of Special Forces combat training had conditioned her to sweep a room in one glance, registering exits, reading threats, translating chatter into terrain. Her current assignment at Redstone was quiet. A temporary cover posting under cryptologic intelligence, to most. She was a junior officer grabbing breakfast, and that was how she preferred it. Covert operators lived on invisibility. Drawing notice was a liability. But today, invisibility would fail her. She grabbed a tray, moved through the line. The cook offered scrambled eggs, sausage, toast. Cross nodded politely, answering short, conserving words like ammunition. She carried her meal to the back corner, where shadows pooled against the bulkhead, sitting alone. She ate with steady rhythm, never rushed, never distracted to anyone watching. She looked like discipline embodied an officer who belonged. But 3 tables away, 5 recruits had already singled her out. Their eyes tracked her every move, whispering, laughing, puffed up on bravado fresh from basic training. Cross never looked at them directly, but her fork paused mid-air, stilled by instinct more than choice. That old weight pressed on her shoulders, the one she thought she'd shed after Naval Special Warfare selection. A feeling she knew too well something was about to break. Around her, the noise of breakfast blurred into background static. At that table of 5, the signal was clear. They were about to stand, about to move, about to test the wrong person. And when they did, Redstone would never forget what happened next. The whispers sharpened. 5 recruits, fresh from basic and still drunk on the thin confidence of youth, locked on to Lieutenant Avery Cross like wolves circling a stray. They'd been at Redstone 4 weeks, long enough to think they understood the Navy, too short to realize how little they knew. Logan Pierce, tall and sharp-jawed, leaned forward. "She thinks she's tough just because she wears the same uniform," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Diego Morales barked a laugh, eager to prove himself. "These women think they can do everything men can do. Pathetic." His words carried the bitterness of someone still bruised from failing half his benchmarks. Ethan Holt, the loud one from Ohio, cracked his knuckles. Somebody ought to teach her a lesson. Marcus Lee shifted uncomfortably, raised on respect. On his mother's lectures about dignity, he hated where this was heading, but peer pressure pressed heavier than his conscience. And then Cole Barrett, the self-appointed ringleader, flashed a grin that made the others fall in line. Maybe it's time we had a conversation with her. Chairs scraped, boots shuffled. 5 shadows rose as one. Cross kept eating. Fork steady, as if the sudden wall of recruits forming around her didn't exist. To her, it was just noise until Pierce leaned down, voice sharpened with mock authority. "I think you should apologize," he said, smirk curling. "And maybe consider a job more suitable." Cross set the fork down with quiet precision, her eyes lifting at last. To anyone else, she looked calm. But to those who knew combat, the tilt of her head, the way her shoulders squared, something fundamental had shifted. Relaxed awareness became cold readiness. "I'm not interested in this conversation," she said evenly. "Return to your seats." The mess hall quieted by degrees. First a few heads turned, then entire tables. Voices fell. Kitchen staff whispered nervously. At the doorway, a master-at-arms pressed his radio, murmuring code. 2 senior enlisted began moving fast, but the recruits were already committed. Pierce pressed harder, planting his hands on her table. "We're not done." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that they were towing a line they couldn't uncross. Cross rose, slow and deliberate, her chair sliding back with the sound of metal on tile. She stood shorter than all 5, but her posture radiated command so sharp it cut. "Last chance," she said, her voice carrying through the hush. "Walk away now, and this ends here." Pierce laughed, mistaking control for weakness. "There are 5 of us, and 1 of you. You're the one who should walk away." He didn't notice the subtle shift in her stance. He didn't see the calculation in her eyes. But one veteran did. Chief Monroe, seated by the bulkhead, fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He'd seen that look before, in dust-choked villages where SEAL teams moved like shadows. The recruits thought they were circling prey. They had no idea they'd just cornered a predator. The air tightened, every sailor waiting to see who would move first. Barrett stepped closer, puffing his chest, trying to fill the air with his sighs. Look at her frozen. She's scared. Cross didn't move, didn't blink. Fear was a language she hadn't spoken in years. Inside, her training whispered truths: 5 bodies, bad spacing, predictable egos. Morales was jittery, Holt undisciplined, Lee hesitant, Pierce the aggressor, Barrett the instigator. In another life, she might have pitied them. Her mind ticked like a metronome. End it quickly. Minimal force, maximum control. Use the room's narrow space. Overwhelm before numbers mattered. What the recruits didn't know was that 15 months earlier, Cross had endured Naval Special Warfare Selection, one of fewer than a dozen women to survive its crucible. She had been drowned, frozen, broken, rebuilt, and she had learned the first rule of operators: never give your enemy the belief they can win. And yet, here in this mess hall, she gave them one more chance. "You're young," she said, voice steady as stone. "You've made a mistake. Don't make it worse. Phones were up now, sailors recording openly. Senior enlisted were pushing through the crowd, radios already alive." A master-at-arms by the doorway quickened his stride. But the circle had closed, and the recruits were deaf to everything but their own bravado. Marcus Lee's voice cracked the silence. "We should walk away. This isn't right." Pierce spun on him, eyes burning. "Don't go soft now." Then he leaned in toward Cross, voice sharpened with contempt. "You think you belong here? You don't." Cross's eyes flickered a subtle hardening of steel. She had offered them exits, and they had closed each one. Their fists clenched, their weight shifted forward. The choice was made. Time slowed. Morales's hand twitched toward her sleeve. Holt crouched, coiled to spring. Barrett's jaw locked with anticipation. Cross exhaled once, her body loosening into the coil before violence. They thought she was cornered. In reality, she had just chosen her battlefield. Morales's hand reached, and 18 seconds at Redstone began the seconds no one in that hall would ever forget. Senior enlisted were already pushing through the crowd, radios hot, but the moment broke faster than they could reach her. Morales's hand landed on Cross's sleeve. Contact. Her left hand clamped his wrist. Her right elbow drove hard into the solar plexus. Air rushed from his lungs in a single gasp. Morales folded, already out of the fight. Cross pivoted, snapping him briefly into a shield. Holt lunged wide, reckless. She dropped Morales aside, ducked beneath Holt's arms, and swept his legs clean. He crashed backward into a table, trays and coffee scattering in a metallic roar that drew shouts. A dozen phones caught the blur. Overhead, the security dome blinked red. Barrett came next, heavy and loud, charging like brute force could rewrite the odds. Cross sidestepped, caught his arm, and turned his momentum into air. A hip throw so crisp it looked rehearsed sent him crashing to the tile. Swagger erased in a single impact. 3 down. The rest followed fast. Pierce lunged, desperate, but Cross met him mid-step, twisted him into a pin, and drove him safely to the floor, arm controlled, pain measured to stop him cold. Silence rippled outward like a shockwave. Marcus Lee stood frozen, palms half raised, caught between loyalty and clarity. Cross glanced at him once, calm, not cruel, and that was enough. He lifted his hands higher and backed away, throat dry, lesson seared into him. From the first grab to the final pin, 18 seconds. Cross's breathing was steady, her stance composed, no gloating, no flourish, just the work done. She released Pierce's arm and stepped back, giving him the dignity of choosing what to do with his broken pride. The mess hall remembered sound again. Chairs scraped, a spoon clattered to the floor. Someone whispered a curse under their breath. A master-at-arms called a code into his handset, by the bulkhead. Chief Monroe finally stood. His fork hadn't moved since the first strike. He had seen Navy drills, Marine sparring, SEAL training. But this was something else. His gaze tracked her balance, the way she never squared to a single threat, always aligned to the whole. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Lieutenant Cross," he said, calm but commanding. "We should talk." Cross bent, gathered her tray from the wreckage, and stood straight again, around her. The entire hall held its breath, waiting to see what she would do, or whether she would say anything at all. She turned toward the exit, the weight of every eye on her, and the story of those 18 seconds already racing far beyond Redstone's walls. For a beat. Nobody moved. Then sound crept back in murmurs, clipped radio calls, the shaky laughter of sailors who had just witnessed a line they would never forget. Morales clutched his ribs, stunned but breathing. Holt sat amid overturned chairs, palms open to a reality that had just been rewritten. Barrett stared blankly at the ceiling lights. Pierce lay face down, cheeks burning with a shame heavier than pain. Marcus Lee still stood with his hands raised, like surrender had seeped all the way into his bones. Cross set her tray on a table, stacked what could be salvaged, and stooped to lift a fallen cup. No dramatics, no victory lap, just quiet professionalism tidying what violence had scattered. Those weren't standard Navy techniques, Chief Monroe said as he approached. Not accusation. Observation. Respect. No. Chief. She replied. Her eyes didn't waver. "You want to tell me where you learned them through proper channels," Cross said. "If you initiate them." His mouth twitched, half approval, half suspicion. He glanced at the security dome, then at sailors already whispering into phones, replaying shaky clips. "This is going to spread," he muttered. "Whether you want it or not." Cross didn't look at the cameras. She looked at the recruits. "Lee," she said. The young sailor flinched. "Too late." "Not too late," Cross corrected. "Next time? Sooner." He swallowed, shame bending into resolve. "Yes." Ma'am. Her gaze shifted to Pierce. You and I wear the same uniform. It belongs to anyone who earns it. Respect isn't something handed down, it's something you live up to. Pierce's jaw trembled. Understood. Barrett pushed himself upright, rubbing his head. What are you? His voice carried no mockery this time, only fear and curiosity. Cross didn't answer. Some truths weren't for dining halls, or phone clips, or gossip threads. Monroe gestured to the corridor. Let's step somewhere quiet. Lieutenant? Cross nodded, unhurried. Behind them, the mess hall fractured into a dozen conversations, sailors replaying each second. Cooks whispering in Spanish. A young petty officer pressing her hands together as if she'd just watched a myth step off the page. In the corridor, noise muffled by concrete. Monroe lowered his voice. I've seen Rangers, recon, force. I've trained half the techniques this Navy claims as its own. What I saw, restraint, sequencing, precision that was naval special warfare. Cross met his gaze. 15 months since selection. Nothing more. Monroe exhaled slowly. Not surprised, only confirmed. Cover cryptologic intelligence, she said. Keeps me out of photographs. Not today. Monroe answered. Security footage gets reviewed. But those phones that ship sailed the second you moved. He was right. By mid-shift, shaky angles and overhead footage would leak beyond the base. 18 seconds at Redstone, a case study in readiness, restraint, and leadership. Within 48 hours, millions of views, debates on women in combat, and at the center, a face without a resume. Monroe slid a plain card from his pocket. Debrief? 1400. Bring your real credentials. Cross took it without looking. Aye. Chief. He hesitated. You handled them without breaking them. That matters. It always does, she said quietly. Back in the hall. The recruits were slower, quieter. Marcus helped Holt to his feet. Then Morales. Barrett stood with a groan. But no joke came. Pierce stared at his open palm like it belonged to someone else. Cross returned long enough to set the last tray on a cart, at the serving line. A young petty officer caught her eye, hope pressed into a single glance. Cross gave the smallest nod. Almost nothing, but it landed like a promise. She reached the doorway, paused, and looked back once at the place where everything had changed. Though she hadn't. They thought she was just another sailor. Redstone would remember the 18 seconds that proved otherwise, and the silence afterward. Where respect meant more than a word, and leadership meant leaving people better than you found them. At 14:00, a steel door would close behind Lieutenant Avery Cross. On the other side waited a file stamped with a classification she couldn't speak aloud, and 3 questions that could reroute her entire career, beginning with the one Chief Monroe hadn't asked yet. Who sent you to Redstone? And why now, if this moment left you holding your breath? Tap like, hit subscribe, and sound off in the comments with your thoughts. We read them all, and every voice helps keep these stories alive.